Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Alison. I write as Alison May, 50% of Juliet Bell, and most recently as Ali Sinclair. And oh, what's that? A brand new Ali Sinclair book cover? Well, yes, it is. And that is the theme of today's video. We're going to talk all about judging a book by its cover. But before we get into that, if you are interested in novel writing and publishing content, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you get notifications when there are new videos. I have new videos on my YouTube every Friday, all about novel writing, publishing industry and all of that sort of jazz. So do subscribe so you see future videos. It makes a huge difference to YouTube creators if you subscribe to the channel. So please, please, please do. For now though, on with the video. It is an old adage and of great wisdom that you cannot judge a book by a cover. It is also not true at all. You absolutely can judge a book by its cover. That's very much the point of book covers. If a reader can't judge your book by its cover, the cover is not doing its job. So, what is the job of a book cover? Fairly simply, the job of a book cover is to entice readers to pick up or click on your book. And how do book covers do that? Well, there's essentially two ways. There are book covers that stand out. There are book covers that don't look like anything you've seen before and grab your attention because they're different or interesting. That's very hard to do and it only happens very occasionally, but we'll talk about it in a little bit more depth. What you see a lot more of are book covers that work by saying to your reader, hey, if you liked books like these, then this book fits into that genre. This book is similar to other books that have the same sort of messaging on their cover. And messaging isn't just the words on the cover, the tagline, the title, things like that. It's the sort of imagery, it's the sort of colour palette, it's the sort of font choices. All of those things are sending your messages to your reader about what type of book this is. And for an awful lot of books, the message they're sending is, if you liked other books that look a bit like this, you'll probably like this book too. That's the sort of fundamentals. But then there is a kind of layer beyond that where in amongst all those books that look quite similar in terms of the sort of genre and tonal messaging they're sending to readers, you still want your book to be the most inviting. So that very often is what you're aiming for with a book cover. Those book covers that kind of break the mould, very often you can only get away with if your book has either a really big name behind it, so you're already a very established author, or a celebrity in another field, or there is huge marketing push behind the book. And what you're doing effectively is establishing your book as the kind of definitive book in a current moment, in a current genre. So one example of that would be here, Richard Osman, The First Thursday Murder Club book. Now that cover when it came out was not massively derivative of lots of things that have gone before. It's quite simple, it has quite limited imagery on it. But what you will see now are lots of covers in that same genre, the sort of cosy end of the crime genre, that are very similar, because what those covers now are saying is, if you like The Thursday Murder Club, if you like Richard Osman, you will probably also like this book. So those essentially are the two ways that covers work. And what I wanted to do in this video is take you a little bit through the evolution of a cover, looking at options that have worked, haven't worked, that did well, that maybe didn't do so well, that maybe did well in some markets but not in others. And we're going to focus on one of my books, and this was my very, very first book, originally published with this cover, As Much Ado About Sweet Nothing. Now we went backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards on that title. I just wanted it to be called Sweet Nothing. The publisher wanted to call it Much Ado About Sweet Nothing. I thought that was too much of a mouthful. And so not only here did we start off with one cover and later change the cover, but we also changed the title over time. So this is the original cover with the original and then the altered title. Came down to being just Sweet Nothing in the end. And I quite liked this cover. But this book came out just at the end of 2013, and I would say that around that time we were sort of in the early stages of a bit of a shift in the rom-com market, and we were moving away from covers like this that were quite bold and quite illustrative into slightly sweeter covers, where you had maybe slightly more escapist, slightly lighter stories, slightly less gritty stories, and that was being reflected in the cover art. And so maybe, although I quite like this cover, it just kind of came out at the wrong moment. Also, this book came out with a publisher that was a digital first publisher, and they were very keen to get into the North American market as well as the UK market. And covers like this, your more illustrative covers, I'm generalising here, don't generally, or certainly at that point in time, didn't generally play as well in the US market. You tended to see a lot more photographic covers in the US market at that point, and that's still true to an extent. So this book was out in ebook originally. When it came out in paperback, the publisher took the opportunity to do a cover redesign. And they redesigned for the ebook first while they were getting ready to send the paperback to print. And this was the redesigned cover. Now, this cover was more aimed towards the US market. It's gone photographic. It's still got some quite bold font choices, some quite bold colouring, which I did quite like. For me, this isn't a cover that would make me pick up the book, but I'm a UK buyer and that's not what I expect a rom-com to look like. In the US market in 2013, 2014, maybe a little more. I also felt that this cover skewed a little bit young. I think it looks a little bit YA, only this is an adult fiction novel. But we had that cover for a little while. But the publisher still wasn't quite happy with it. Their salespeople weren't still quite happy with it. So they redesigned again and then came to this cover, which is the paperback cover that ended up coming out. Pull the paperback from my shelf. There it is on the paperback. And this cover was the cover that the publisher kept for the rest of the time that the book was with them. And it's an interesting choice. So they were aiming for the US market. They were aiming for something that looked a bit grittier and less light rom-com-y, because the rom-com market was very escapist and light and fluffy at that point in time. I personally think that probably they went a little bit too dark, and this looks slightly gothic rather than looking like a comedy. But the thought process was they wanted something photographic, they wanted something that looked grittier, not as escapist, not as light as a lot of rom-coms that were around at the time, and this was where they ended up. I ultimately got the rights to that book and all my books that were with my first publisher back, and that's something that's quite common, that you will get rights to backlist back over your career if sales fall below a certain level, or if you reach an agreement with the publisher, or if the publisher closes. All of those things can happen and do happen quite regularly, and you might get rights back. And I reissued that book. It's ebook only at the moment, but I reissued the book, and this is the reissued cover. And I came to this cover with the help of a cover designer because I was reacting against that cover that I had always felt was too dark, too gothic, too mysterious, too sort of paranormal looking. And I wanted something that did look lighter and more escapist. And again, was more illustrative, because realistically, I don't have a profile in the US. I'm always likely at the moment, at this point in my career at least, to sell more in the UK. So I thought that trying to reach for the US market, if that was damaging UK sales, wasn't really worthwhile. So this is the current cover for that book. And if you look across the range, I'll put those down here. If you look across the range, you can see how much that cover has changed and how many times that cover has changed over time. It's a little unusual for a book cover to change that often, but it's not outside the realms of possibility. Publishers frequently do rejacket books, particularly books that are only out in ebook, because it's relatively straightforward to do, because it is one of the biggest selling tools. Now, in addition to sending the right genre messages, which I think this cover now does and this version maybe didn't, in addition to sending those right genre messages, What you also want your cover to do is entice your reader in. And this is my brand new cover, the Christmas season. This comes out in August. This is my second rom-com as Ali Sinclair. And we've redesigned the cover style. The publisher has redesigned the cover style a bit from the first book. And one of the things that I think this cover does really well is invites the reader in. There's a little bit of movement, there's a little bit of dynamic in this cover because the couple are walking away from you. There's the house in the background. It sort of draws you forward into that world that they're in. And for that reason, alongside the fact that I think it sits really well next to other covers in the genre, for that reason, I think this might be my favourite cover I've ever had. Now, obviously, it's my newest cover, and so I'm kind of going to say that, but in this case, I actually do think this is probably my favourite ever cover. I think it hits both those requirements. Firstly, that it sends the right genre messages. So this says romantic, it says Christmas, it says fun, it says light, it says rom-com. But it also, I think, goes that extra mile in that it does entice the reader in. There's a bit of storytelling here. There's something that makes you want to lean in and follow those two people into the world. At least that's what I'm hoping. Fingers crossed that readers feel the same. What are your thoughts on book covers? If you're an author, how do you cope when you have a cover that you absolutely hate? Because it happens. How do you cope if, there's options, your publisher loves one and you love another? What I would say just before we close out is that whether you like a cover or not is largely irrelevant. I've had covers that I really liked that barely sold at all. And I've had covers that I really wasn't that fond of, that I thought were like overly cutesy or a bit generic and didn't really float my boat, that have sold really, really well. So whether you like it or not isn't really relevant. But how do you get past that when you're doing your social media and you're talking about your book? How do you get past a cover that you don't really like? And as a reader, what intrigues you about covers? What lures you in? Let me know in the comments. As ever, if there are any novel writing, publishing topics you would like me to talk about, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and I will see you next time.